This is going to be the second video in a series where we're going to use the same problem that I had started with when I created a frequency distribution table by hand. We're going to create the following based upon a given data set and given parameters: a frequency distribution table, frequency histogram, frequency polygon, and ogive. We want to use a data set entitled President's Age of Time at Inauguration, and we want to create a frequency distribution table using 5 classes, including columns for your class limits, your class boundaries, frequency, class midpoint, relative frequency, and cumulative frequency. And I've already done that by hand, but I'm going to show you how to do that in Excel because that's the next part of this. We want to create the frequency distribution table using Excel. And so let's go ahead and begin by starting the frequency distribution table in Excel. We're going to use this data set, which is the age at inauguration of the U.S. presidents. There are 45 data values here because there have been 45 presidents, even though Grover Cleveland was both the 22nd and 24th president. So that we count them separately because obviously his age at inauguration was different for the 2 times that he was sworn in. Now, let's go ahead and start by copying that data set into Excel. This data set has already been sorted, and in fact, I can go backwards to the original data set and once again walk you through how to sort that. We're going to start by highlighting the column that has the ages at inauguration. And then we're going to go over to sort and filter, and we're going to sort smallest to largest. And then we'll get this sort warning from Excel stating that there's data in the column next to the one that I'm trying to sort. Do I want to expand the selection or not? In this case, I do, because I want this column of the presidential names to sort along with the ages at inauguration. So we'll left click sort now, and it goes ahead and it sorts the names along with the ages at inauguration. The ages at inauguration are what drives the sorting of the names. So in this case, we note that we have the smallest value of 42, or the youngest age, and then the oldest age, or the greatest value, is 70. So then we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by putting together our frequency distribution using Excel. This video may be a little lengthy. You may want to take a break as you're working through this, but I think in the long run it will be worth it for you to have a better understanding of how Excel functions. So the first thing that I'm going to do is start with determining what my class width is going to be, and in order to do that I need to know what the range of the data set is. So we're going to go ahead and type in the word range right here, and I'm going to use an equal sign, and then I'm going to click over here, and to find the range I'm simply going to use Excel functionality. I'm going to type equals, I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to select the largest data value, subtraction sign, and then the smallest data value, and press enter, and now I have my range. I also want to go ahead and determine the number of classes that I'm going to use. In this particular problem, when we say the number of classes, we're simply going to be using 5. Now that's going to change depending on what you're doing, and obviously the range is going to change. You know, you may want to do a data distribution or a frequency distribution table that has 9 classes, and in that case you would use 9 instead of 5. So now we'll go ahead and find the class width, or the class interval, and I'm just going to simply type class int and use an equal sign. And now what I'm going to do is click into this next cell, and let me move that a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to use the fact that this is going to be equal to the range divided by, using the slash key, the number of classes, press enter, and that gives me 5.6. Now remember, every time you calculate a class interval or class width, you always want to round up to the next convenient whole number. When I say round up, it doesn't matter what this value is. It could have been 5.1. I still would round up to 6. And so that's what I'm going to do next. Now, Excel does have a rounding function. The problem is it's going to use traditional rounding rules. And if you simply use equals round and then type in whatever cell number that you're going to use, it will round according to those rounding rules. And I will give you an example of that. Let's say that I have 4.2 and I have 4.7. And I'm going to use the Excel rounding function. So I'm going to type the equal sign, and then the function is round, and then I simply want to go ahead and click the number that I want to round. Oops. Sorry about that little mistake. Let's try that again. So equals round, open parentheses. This is the cell I want to use, and then I'm going to have to type in a comma and then how many digits I want it to round it to. So in this particular case, I want it to round to 0 digits because I want it to be a whole number. And just press enter and you'll notice that it rounded to 4. Now, in this case, if I've got 4.7 and I want to do the same thing, we're going to go ahead and type in equals round, open parentheses, this cell, comma, 0 because I want it to be a whole number, and it's rounded up to 5. I don't want that to happen when I'm dealing with class widths. I always want it to round up, so we're going to go ahead and get around that by using a little trick. We're going to use the integer function. So equals int, open parentheses, and then I'm going to go ahead and type that, or select that cell, close the parentheses. Now, if I went ahead and hit enter here, you'll notice that it rounds down. But remember, I said we always want to round up. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this, and I'm going to go ahead and type in +1 because I always want to go up 1, and you'll note that it is now fully rounded to 6. The only reason I bring this up is because there are going to be times where you find a class interval and it's going to be 4.3 or 12.1 or whatever, and you need to round up. So that's why I'm impressing upon that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create our frequency distribution in Excel. So we're going to start by going ahead. I'm going to merge these two cells, and I'm going to merge these two cells, and I'll show you why. I'm going to type in the word class here, and I'm going to type in the word boundary here, because we're going to do both the class intervals and the class boundaries. In this column, I want to have the lower limit, L limit, and I'm just going to use abbreviations, and upper limit, and likewise this is going to be the lower boundary, and this will be your upper boundary. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and start with the fact that the lower limit of the first class is always going to be your smallest value in your distribution. So I'm simply going to use equals, and then I'm just going to left click that cell and press enter. And you'll note that it's 42. Now remember, my class width is 6. So what I want to do is add 6 to this value. Once again, let's use Excel. Equals this cell plus 6. And I don't even need to use +6. I could go ahead and just left click this, which is going to highlight that cell, and then notice that I now have 48. Now, there's two schools of thoughts on getting the upper limit. The upper limit of the first class is always going to be 1 less than the lower limit of the second class. So I can simply type equals, I'll tap that, -1, and now I have my limit. And now the rest of these are actually going to be quite simple because I'm just going to add the class width to each one of these. So this one is going to be equal this value plus the class width, which is this over here. And you'll note that I've gone ahead and done that. Now the thing is there are ways of going ahead and populating all of this, and you can simply drag this little square down and it's going to populate the formula. However, in this particular case, it's not going to be able to do what I want it to do. So let's go ahead and undo that, and let me show you a little trick. So what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and continue to add this value. So what I should have done in this one, instead of typing in M2, I should have typed in $M and then $2. And what's going to happen now is that particular cell is going to be frozen, so that when I drag my cursor down, it will always go back to the cell M2. And so let me show you what happens when I drag this down. And remember, we're only going 5 classes, so now I've gone down to here. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I want to go ahead and edit this so that I have $M2 in here. And yes, there are shortcuts to this, but I want to show you exactly everything that I'm doing. And so now I'm going to go ahead and drag this down, and you'll see that I now have populated my class upper and lower limits. And let me go ahead and center this by clicking this value here. And now I want to go ahead and do the boundaries. The boundaries are going to be 0.5 below and 0.5 above. So for the lower boundary, it's going to be 0.5 less than 42. So I can simply say equals that minus 0.5. And I'll go ahead and hit enter, and you'll notice that I now have 41.5. So now I'm going to go ahead and populate the rest of the lower boundary column by simply clicking on the 41.5 cell and then dragging down, and you'll notice that it populates. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the upper bound. I'm going to go ahead and add 0.5 to this upper limit. And then I'm just going to drag this down, and it populates, and now I have that column all set. So the next column that we want to create is the midpoint column. And that's going to be the midpoint of the interval or class. So the easiest way to do this is going to be to go ahead and add the lower limit to the upper limit and then divide by 2. So I'm going to use Excel once again, equal, open parentheses, because I want to be able to combine these two cells before dividing, plus, and then we'll go ahead and click that cell, close the parentheses, and then I will divide by 2. Now there's going to be a couple of different ways I can approach this. I can go ahead and copy that formula and into the next formula, and you'll see that it does the exact same thing. And there are my midpoints. In addition, I could have simply just added 6 to this first midpoint and populated all of those, because the class limit, or I mean the class interval, is 6. So the next column that we're going to build is the relative frequency column. Let me go ahead and spread this out a little more. And I'm just going to simply type in REL period frequency, or FREQ period. The relative frequency, as stated in my previous video, is where I take, and I apologize for that, we want to do the frequency column first. I was getting ahead of myself. So we're going to do the frequency column. And here what I'm going to do is use Excel. So we're going to use the count feature in Excel. I'm going to go ahead and click in the cell that I want to list the frequency for this particular class, 42 to 47 in. Then I'm going to use the drop-down menu to the right of the Autosum, and you'll see where it says count numbers. If I left-click that, Excel automatically populates this, but I don't want to use the numbers that are highlighted for my count. Instead, what I want to do is come over here and use the numbers that fall between 42 and 47. And I'm going to highlight those by left-clicking in the top cell and holding down the mouse button and then dragging down and then releasing. Then press enter, and you'll notice that the frequency is already calculated. I will examine this for one quick moment. You'll see this little green arrow or triangle in the upper left-hand corner. What that means is that there is a potential error. And this particular error is saying that I'm ignoring cells that are close to the cell that I'm doing the calculation in. You can safely ignore this. You could also use the drop-down menu and also go ahead and left-click Ignore Error. Now what I want to do is continue to use that particular function. So I'll go ahead and continue the count numbers, and here I'm going to go from 48 to 53. So there's a 48. I will drag down, and there we go. Press the enter key, and it's populated, and there's 11 values there. Then we'll go ahead and continue that process, and we're going to go from 54 to 59. You'll notice that there's a lot more numbers here, and then we're going to continue on. We'll do the count numbers, and we're going to go from 60 to 65, which is right here to right here. Enter. And then finally, we'll do the last one. Now what I'm going to do is make sure that all of these sum to the number of data values that I have. And I'm just simply going to use the Autosum feature. I will left click that, and you'll notice that it will highlight the column of numbers that I want to add together, and I will go ahead and enter that, and it gives me the numbers that I need. And what I'm going to add right here is just to identify what those values are, and I'm going to use the sigma F that I used in my previous video. So I'm going to go ahead and left click insert, come over here to symbol, and I want to use sigma. I've used it previously, but if you have never used it, it's under the subset Greek and Coptic. I just simply left click that, click insert, and then close, and you'll see that it's there. Now what I want to do is come back to the home, and I want to put italicized F there for frequency, and then equals, whoops, and I'm going to go ahead and justify it to the right. And eventually what I'm going to do is set all these values centered in the cells, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now let's go ahead and talk about relative frequency. Relative frequency is going to be taking the frequency of each class right here and then dividing it by the total number of data values. Once again, I'm going to use Excel. Equal this value, the division key, that value, press enter, and it's going to give me a decimal. And I can adjust the number of decimal places if I want, but we'll just leave it as is right now. And we're going to go ahead and continue to do that. Now, one of the things is if I try to drag this down, you'll see that it causes division by 0, and that's because I didn't go ahead and adjust my formula, which if I look at that, I can go ahead and put $sign in front of the M and a $sign in front of the 12, and that's going to lock that value in place, and then I can just simply go ahead and drag this down, and it will fix the problem. And there's my relative frequency. Now, I also want to go ahead and sum this particular column because it should add to 1 if I've done this correctly. And so that's what I'm going to do. Notice that I've dropped down just one space because I need to be able to populate this with what it is that I'm doing, and I'm going to use the sigma again. We'll come back over to symbol. We'll go ahead and left click that. We'll hit insert, close. And in front of this, or after this, I'm going to open parentheses, and I'm going to use an italicized font again, and I'm going to use the frequency divided by the total number, which in this case is n, or we are calling that sigma frequency. So up here, I could have just as easily put in n equals. It's all the same, where n is the number of data values. And I will go ahead and put an equal sign after this. I'm going to justify this to the right. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the Autosum feature. Now notice that it's trying to add in this right here, and since there's nothing in there, that's not a big deal, but I want to make sure that I'm using the correct values, and you'll see that it added to 1. And now finally we're going to go with the cumulative frequency column, and the cumulative frequency column is simply going to be that where I start with the first frequency, which is 6. So we'll just simply do equal this value. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the next frequency to that. So it's going to be 6 plus 11. So I'm simply going to type in equals, and then it's going to be this plus this, and hit enter. And now you'll see that we're at 17. And I want to continue that particular function. And I can just simply go ahead and drag this down, and you'll see that it goes ahead and automatically populates. This value right here, which I'm going to highlight in yellow, should be equivalent to this value right here, which I will also highlight in yellow. And so now we have created our frequency distribution table. Now I'm going to tidy it up a little bit by putting in borders. So let me go ahead and get rid of the highlighting, and I'm simply going to go ahead and use the fact that I can format the cells. There's a couple of different ways of doing this. I'm going to go ahead and format the entire body, or the main body of this, really quickly. I will highlight all of that, right click and left click format cells. Then I want to left click border if it's not already highlighted there. And I want to go ahead and left click outline and inside and click OK. And you'll notice that my table has now been formatted. I need to go ahead and do that up here, so I will highlight. I'll do the same thing. I'll format the cells. I'll do the outline. I'll do the inside. Left click OK. And once again, so now I want to do that here. And there are multiple different ways that you can approach this. This is just one way. And there we go. Now, this is the frequency distribution table that I will use to create the histogram, the polygon, and the ogive. But I will do that in separate videos.